I wonder if you've heard this quote before. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. It means that no matter how well designed and how well thought out your strategic plan or vision, it will fall flat unless your team or your organization shares the appropriate culture. So basically, unless you walk the talk and talk the walk, your plans won't come to much. So every organization, in fact, any group of people who are in some kind of relationship with one another will soon start to develop habits, certain ways of doing things, often that are not necessarily articulated or easily identified. So here at St. Gabriel's, while we definitely have a sense and an idea where God is leading us into the future, we also want to strive for certain values that will underpin everything that we do and everything that we are. When Catherine and I felt called to St. Gabriel's over 4 years ago, we wanted to come with certain values that would shape the church, and those values kind of reflected our lives as well. And then last summer, a small group from the church were commissioned by the PCC to cement those values and to tweak them if needed. And this is where we got to. Our 3 values, oh wow, you really can't see that very well as I turn around and look at it. It looks much better on that screen over there. If you'd like to see it, you might be able to see it. 3 values that underpin and shape all that we do and all that we say here at St. Gabriel. So they are hospitality, they are whole life wholeness, and everyone involved. And over these next 3 weeks, we're going to be taking each of these values in turn and asking ourselves what it means for us as a church and what it might mean for our lives as well. So today, we are looking at hospitality, and you will hopefully have a card that you will have been given as you came in, and on it, I've made it really simple. We've got 4 things that I'm going to look at as part of our hospitality today. So hospitality through being hosted, hospitality through being the host, hospitality of home, and hospitality of heart. Yes, 4 H's for hospitality. I'm very proud of myself. The first 2 speak more to us as a church, and that's what we're going to look at. And then the second 2 are more a challenge to us as individuals. Now, in our reading this morning, Jesus had been invited by a Pharisee to have dinner. The Pharisee is, at first anyway, the one who offers the invitation. The Pharisee is the host. And he's not only invited Jesus, but as we see in verse 49, there were also other men at the table. No, it was just men. Now, as was the culture at the time, this type of invitational meal, it wasn't private so much, but kind of imagine an exclusive outdoor eating place that could be seen by passers-by. And it's a great place to show off not only the food that was being served, but also the exclusive guests that had been invited. And here, the star guest by far is the infamous and controversial Jesus. And so, as we read on in the story, an immoral woman, a sinful woman, other translations say, from the city, heard that Jesus was eating there, and she goes to the meal. We're not sure who she was or why she was a sinner, but the fact that she was from the city and that she had enough money to bring a jar filled with expensive perfume should kind of lead us to conclude that she was likely involved in maybe not so virtuous work. So here, her coming to this meal is outrageous. It is outrageous. But not only that, she then comes and she kneels behind Jesus, who was reclining at the table, and you can imagine people eating at a low table, all kneeling with their elbows down and their feet coming out. And she comes to Jesus with her tears on her hair. She wipes Jesus' feet and puts perfume on them. This is intimate, it's physical, it's sensual. It is just downright shocking. So take a moment to consider the story. What shocks or surprises you the most? Think about the role of women in that culture. Consider the actions of this woman and Jesus' response. Today, we're asking what it means to be a church that demonstrates and embodies hospitality. And this story is all about hospitality. And firstly, we see that through hospitality, through being hosted. So Jesus here acts as the one who is hosted. He was invited by the Pharisee, and Jesus was constantly being hosted by others. He was willing to go to others. He went to the outcasts, the sinners, the tax collectors. He went to those on the margin of society, and we read that he ate with them. And it was one of the constant accusations aimed at Jesus that he was a friend to sinner. And even a few chapters before, he's accused of being a glutton and a drunkard. So much of the time he's spending with those who would be seen as sinners. But he's also willing, as we see here, to be hosted by the rich and the powerful, by the religious elite. So being hosted by others was at the heart of the ministry of Jesus. And so for us, that means that a church that values hospitality must be willing to not only host, but also be hosted by others. And that means getting out of church, going to other places and other peoples. It's sometimes uncomfortable going to somewhere new. It means we go out of our comfort zones, particularly when we want to go somewhere or to someone that is completely different to us. Catherine and I have been to East Africa a number of times, and hospitality is a key value within East African culture. We once had the chance to visit the child that we sponsor, and we went first to his school and then were hosted by his family, and this is his family and the community where he lived. They lived on a small farm with a 2-room home with no electricity or running water. But they'd clearly spent a lot of money buying bottled fizzy drinks and cakes wrapped in plastic to offer to us when we arrived. There was way more than we needed. Their hospitality was incredible. But it did make Catherine and I feel uncomfortable, not just because of the setting, which was very obviously foreign to our own, but also that they'd clearly spent a lot of their little money that they had on us. It was deeply challenging and moving. And there's the family there with our sponsor child holding the football. So as a community of the kingdom of Jesus, we must be willing to be hosted by others, to receive from others, to go to the setting and the place of others, particularly those that are different from us. Because there is an important power dynamic in hospitality. If you're always the one who is hosting, then you will always kind of remain with the power. The invitation is on your terms. You control the space and the environment. And so when you are hosted by another, in one sense, you relinquish control, you relinquish power, you release the security that we so often hold onto. And it's often in that space that we become so much more open to the lives, to the stories of others. We hear new perspectives and we perceive new possibilities. And it is fertile ground where relationships can really grow. Secondly, we see hospitality, let me go back to this, hospitality by being a host. So in this story, Jesus flips from being the one hosted to the one who hosts this woman. He welcomes her. He makes her feel safe, included, and then does the ultimate act of hospitality. He offers her forgiveness and gives her peace. And again, throughout the Gospels, Jesus acted as the host. The feeding of the 5,000, the meal with the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, when the resurrected Jesus makes breakfast for his disciples on the beach. Jesus was a host, and he pointed to a heavenly banquet where he will host the best party of all time. So a church that values hospitality must be willing to not only be hosted by others, but also host. And we're generally pretty good at this. We must be willing to offer a deep, radical, and authentic welcome, to do everything possible to welcome everyone and anyone. And we do that because this is what Jesus did. And as we see in this story, it's in that place of radical, generous welcome that this woman is transformed, that Jesus does the transformation through the forgiveness that he offers. And so we must ask critical questions of how good we are at welcome. So take a moment to consider this for our church. Imagine you were an outsider from a different culture or background, someone who had no experience of church. How would they feel if they came into this church community? Now, there is an important tension here. As a church, we rightly have worshipping habits. You might even say, for want of a better word, rituals that are fundamental to our faith. They make us who we are, and they connect us to the global church, present and also past. We have traditions, for want of a better word, that are important, and they've been passed down to us. They've been established. The heart of this is Holy Communion, but there's also confession, reading the Bible, intercession, sung praise, and worship. These are critical to who we are. And just like if we visited a mosque, we would be respectful of their ways of worship. While we might not understand them or even agree, I'm not sure we would expect them to change so that we would feel more comfortable. However, there is a tension here because there is something distinctive about the Christian faith. It's always been the calling of the church that while the message of the gospel doesn't change, and the reason why we worship doesn't change, we're called to constantly rethink, to reimagine, to make them applicable, connectable to the culture around us. And so a church that values hospitality will demonstrate an openness to others. It will stay curious, wanting to hear the views of others, and a humility and a desire to grow. So what I'd love you to do now, if you're willing, is to turn to those around you and to have a chat about St. Gabriel's. Now, you might have been here for many, many years, only a few weeks. This might even be your first week here at St. Gabriel. We'd love you to just share how good we are at not only being hosted, as in going out and going away to others, but also at being the host. So have a little chat, and I've given you a piece of paper there. You can write a few thoughts on there. We've got some pens at the back. Now, if you feel really uncomfortable talking, that's absolutely fine. You can sit where you are and look very intently at your card and even scribble things on. But if you want to, turn quickly, 2 minutes, chat to those around you. How do you experience St. Gabriel's, this church, as being hosted and also being the host? Okay, 2 minutes. Is that all right? Go for it. Okay, just 20 more seconds. Great. If you could just conclude those thoughts, that'd be wonderful. So don't lose your conversation. If now, or maybe as I talk, or maybe later on today, when you're awake in the middle of the night, you have a fantastic idea of how we could be better with our hospitality as a church, please do get in touch. Let's not lose some of what you have been sharing and talking about, how we as a church can do better. And also those who are joining us on Zoom as well, I hope you were able to have a conversation as part of that Zoom meeting. Please do share things with me if you had any ideas. So, we've looked at hospitality being hosted, we've looked at host. Now we're going to think more maybe about ourselves and a challenge to us. Hospitality of home and hospitality of heart. Did you notice how the woman becomes the host in this story? There's so much going on here, lots of different change of dynamics. So let's read again what Jesus says to Simon. When I entered your home, you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet, but she has washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss, but from the first time I came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You neglected the courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she has anointed my feet with rare perfume. Jesus demonstrates to Simon how this woman has showed so much better hospitality than he did. This sinful woman has shown him up. And imagine how Simon must have felt. He had invited the infamous Jesus to his house. He had managed to get him to dinner, and now he was showing Jesus off to passers-by. Maybe Simon now thought, in his home, with all his power, he could teach Jesus a thing or two. Don't miss how deeply shocking this is, how Jesus completely turns it on its head. And Jesus challenges the practical hospitality of Simon. Yes, he had invited Jesus, but he hadn't been a generous and a welcoming host. Now, those who know me know I don't much like confrontation. I don't particularly like challenging people, generally because I like people to like me. I'm also very wary of the position of power that I have as a vicar and as a preacher. So trying to make people to change through shaming or blaming, in my experience, doesn't work and often does the opposite. But I did feel this morning, there's the but, I felt prompted to challenge us this morning. And I want you to hear this from a heart of love and respect for every person here. Moreover, if you are a visitor, and you only joined us recently, maybe just ignore the next 2 minutes. So I want to ask us all, when was the last time you hosted someone in your house? Maybe not just family or good friends, but other members of the congregation, maybe even strangers. How often do you invite people round for a meal? When did you last invite a newer member of the congregation around for a cup of tea? I completely understand that there are practically lots of reasons why some of us can't host, and they're good and they're obvious and they're sensible reasons. But maybe the challenge is that for some of us, particularly after COVID, we've got a bit comfortable with our homes. Okay, that's the challenge over. That's as far as I'm going to go. Finally, we see hospitality of heart. The hospitality of Jesus speaks to the heart. In our passage, Simon the Pharisee, the one is hosting the meal, thinks to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She's a sinner. And Jesus hears his thoughts and responds with a parable. It's a simple story demonstrating that those who are forgiven much will be likely to love much in return. Did you notice that the woman doesn't say anything in this story, but her actions speak so much louder than her words? She doesn't ask Jesus for forgiveness, but it's clearly what her heart is longing for. She weeps over Jesus. It's like all her shame and her guilt are pouring out, and Jesus forgives her. And did you notice Jesus' words at the very end? He says, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Now, the original Greek words here comes from the word to join, to tie together into a whole, particularly this idea of wholeness. So it's a shalom peace. It's a God's gift of wholeness, and we're going to be exploring that more next week. So Jesus offers the joining together, the gift of wholeness to this woman. Jesus speaks to her heart and transforms everything. A hospitality of heart is reflected by a heart within us that seeks the indwelling of God's Holy Spirit. A heart that says, "Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come and have your way. Come and make yourself at home in my life." And so how do we cultivate habits and routines so that we have a life that enables us to say again and again, "Come, Holy Spirit, have your way in me"? And so, as we draw to a close, you will see two more titles, two more headlines at the bottom there. And I'd love you to just spend a few moments on your own now, considering how you might develop hospitality of home quite practically, and then hospitality of heart. What might be stopping or restricting, allowing and welcoming God's Holy Spirit into your life to come to flood, to infuse every aspect of who you are? Take a moment to think for yourself. If it's helpful, it is for me. Write a few things down. Take the card away for you. Put it somewhere memorable, on your fridge, where you do your teeth, somewhere like that, so you can come back to it. But let's take a moment to ask God's Spirit to speak to us, to be welcome to his Holy Spirit this morning. And then we're going to sing together.